The Australian Taxation Office is under scrutiny for paying out more than $1.2 billion in fake GST claims to scammers on social media.
Look, this is almost unbelievable until you read about it. It's a $2 billion fraud against the Australian public.
The ATO is blaming influencers on TikTok for promoting the scam that netted at least $1.2 billion in fake GST claims.
Well, up to 150 Australian tax office workers have been investigated, suspected of taking part in a fraud scheme worth $2 billion.
This is really highly embarrassing. It's almost as if the fox has got control of the henhouse, guys.
In late 2020, a few Australian banks were noticing something odd. They were seeing some of their customers receive large payments from the Australian Taxation Office, ranging from a couple of $1,000s to some that were over $100,000. And what made everything more strange was that some of these people who seemingly had a successful business to warrant such payments from the Taxation Office were also receiving social benefits. This didn't add up. What the bank stumbled upon was one of Australia's largest tax fraud schemes, propagated via none other than TikTok. How did it get there, and what happened? Let me explain. Australia has something called the Goods and Services Tax, or GST for short. This is essentially a value-added tax of 10% on most goods and services sold in Australia. This tax is normally paid together with the item, and the price you see in a store has the GST already applied to it. But if you have a business and are buying something for your business, you have the benefit of being able to claim back the GST on anything you bought. This really helps businesses because it reduces their costs, and so it can increase their cash flow and profitability. More money could then be reinvested back into the business, allowing for more growth, which is good for the economy as well. And interestingly, this GST refund system in Australia was based on the Honour Code. The refund process was self-assessed, and the government trusted people to be honest and report the correct transactions. But as with most things in the world, where there is a possibility of something being exploited, there are people to take advantage of it. The way people started to exploit this system was the following. They would create and register a new fake business to obtain an Australian business number. Then, using this number, they would submit a form claiming that they spent thousands of dollars setting up the company and requesting a GST refund on that fictitious spending. These GST refunds would allow for one to claim up to 50,000 Australian dollars at a time, which meant that some taxpayers were reported to have claimed hundreds of thousands of Australian dollars worth of business expenses to obtain these absurd refunds. And because the system was self-assessed, the Taxation Office wouldn't check if the spending was real and would almost blindly issue a GST refund. It's a very simple scheme. So simple, in fact, that the director of tax communications for a tax preparation company said he doesn't know how these people thought they would get away with it. As a matter of fact, while some used fake identities to set up the business and claim the money, others used their actual identities and information, which meant their whole scheme was able to be traced back to them. Although this GST fraud scheme is relatively common and was gaining a bit more popularity in late 2020, there was something about it this time that made it so significant. In mid-2021, there were some that took to social media, specifically TikTok, to promote this scheme without properly telling people that it was essentially fraud. It started out as videos explaining and advertising it as a way to get a loan from the government, or to get the tax office to send money directly into your account. And because the promise was so good, it went viral, and later more people joined in, promising to help people to get the free money if they gave them their personal details. And naturally, the refund requests started pouring in. There were some people who were unknowingly committing tax fraud, while there were other people who did understand that it was fraud, but still went through with it because the money was so easily accessible and it seemed like no one would catch on. But they'd soon find out they were wrong. The banks realized early on that there were more payments from the Taxation Office to their customers than usual. After the scheme became more and more popular, banks started to freeze the accounts that were receiving these strange transactions and also reported the scam to the Australian Taxation Office. Allegedly, the Taxation Office didn't even act on it, and the Australian Financial Review stated that there were apparently disagreements on which department in the Taxation Office would handle the issue. It wasn't until February 2022, when the banks had enough and notified the Reserve Bank of Australia, that any action towards solving the fraud problem took place. And in April 2022, the Taxation Office launched Operation Protego, aimed at cracking down on the issue. 600 tax officers were put on the case, and it wasn't long until they realized how big this scam had become. It was found that more than 60,000 people had taken part in this scheme, and the tax office admitted to having paid more than 1.6 billion Australian dollars in fake GST claims. However, they did manage to stop the scam by taking compliance action against most of the people and arresting over 100 people. The operation had managed to stop an extra $2.7 billion from being paid out as of June 2023. They found that a majority of people taking part in the fraud were on social benefits, and it seemed a lot like people took the scheme as an opportunity to rinse as much money out of the system as possible, because around 30% attempted the scheme twice and 10% attempted it at least 3 times. Interestingly, it wasn't only civilians on welfare that took part in the scam. 150 Australian tax officials were also investigated because of suspicions of them taking part in the fraud. It turned out that 12 of them actually had committed fraud whilst working at the taxation office, while some of them were victims of identity theft and didn't do anything. The identity theft was unfortunately not limited to the tax officials. There were many Australians who had become victims of identity theft and had their information used to create a fake company to access these GST refunds. The scale of this fraud was massive, and it's obvious that it couldn't have become this extensive without social media. With social media being ingrained in all of our lives, it's reasonable to assume that something similar will happen in the future, and that this is just the start of it. Online financial scams are on the rise. Barclays Bank stated that 77% of all investment scams originate on social media, and it's logical to say that the number will only increase. So, what can we take away from this fiasco? Well, obviously, you can see just how powerful social media is and how large of an effect it can have in such a short amount of time. And relating to this, it's crucial to adapt to new technologies. Partly why this scam slipped through was that the taxation office didn't expect such a scheme to blow up from social media. And for the more personal takeaways, when it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. There are people who fell into the trap trusting something that sounded too good and now are facing fines, arrest, prison sentences, or other legal action. But my favorite lesson from this case, which is slightly hidden but so important for business, is that sometimes an imperfect decision is better than no decision. It took the taxation office more than half a year to start working on solving this problem, partly because they allegedly couldn't figure out which department should take care of it. I wonder how much more money they could have saved if only they had made a quick decision for anyone to work on the case. They could have found out much earlier that this was one of the biggest tax fraud schemes in Australian history. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot, and YouTube thinks you'll enjoy this video too. See you next time.